In the ruthless Wyoming wilderness, a desperate mother runs for her life. But what she carries in her arms is worth more than life itself. The cold winds howled across the vast, unforgiving plains of Wyoming. It was a land that had been shaped by fierce storms, scorching heat, and the resilience of those who called it home. The rugged terrain, with its jagged mountains in the distance and the endless stretches of prairie grass, hid the secrets of many souls who sought refuge in its wilderness. In the midst of this desolate beauty, Clara, a woman of indomitable spirit, struggled to keep her son Isaac safe. Clara had always known the wilderness was unforgiving, but it had never felt quite as hostile as it did now. She had spent years building a life in the quiet town of Silver Creek, tucked in a corner of Wyoming that seemed far removed from the dangers of the world. But now the past had caught up with her. Isaac, barely 6 years old, had inherited his mother's fiery eyes and soft heart. His laughter echoed through the sparse trees surrounding their cabin, but Clara could barely hear it. Her ears were attuned to something else, the sound of hooves in the distance. Hooves she knew too well. Hooves that had once heralded a nightmare. Joshua Carrington, her ex-husband, had just been released from prison. The man who had torn apart her world was now back, and this time he wasn't gonna just hurt her. He wanted her son. His dark eyes, full of bitterness and revenge, had haunted her every night since she had left him years ago. She knew that the moment he found out about Isaac, he would stop at nothing to take him. Clara was no stranger to hardship. Life in the Wild West had taught her to be strong, but the thought of Isaac being taken from her was a pain she couldn't bear. He was her everything. Her life had been filled with shadows of fear and heartache, but Isaac had brought light into her world. She wouldn't let that light be extinguished. The wind whipped through the trees as Clara paced the small cabin, her heart pounding in her chest. Isaac, who had been playing with his wooden toys on the floor, looked up at her, sensing the change in the air. "Mama," he asked in his soft, innocent voice, "is something wrong?" Clara knelt beside him, her hands shaken slightly as she smoothed his unruly brown hair. She tried to smile, but the smile was thin, fragile. "Nothing, sweetheart. Just stay close, okay?" she whispered. Her heart sank as she saw his eyes fill with confusion. He didn't fully understand the danger, but he trusted her. And that trust was everything. Clara had spent the past few weeks preparing for this moment. She had packed a small bag with essentials, food, water, and a few blankets. She knew it wasn't enough, but it was all she could carry. It was time to leave the cabin, time to vanish into the wilderness before Joshua could find them. The thought of abandoning the only home she had known felt like a betrayal, but Clara had no choice. She had to protect Isaac at all costs. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the endless plains, Clara and Isaac quietly slipped out of their cabin. The shadows grew longer, and the chill of evening crept in. It was a coldness that went beyond the temperature. It was the kind of coldness that could freeze your soul. Clara led Isaac through the dense trees, her eyes darting nervously, watching for any signs of movement. Every rustling leaf, Every snap of a twig beneath her boots sent a shiver down her spine. Joshua was out there, somewhere, and he was getting closer. The path ahead was treacherous. Thick pine trees lined their route, and every now and then Clara had to pull Isaac through brambles or around rocks. The wild terrain was harsh, but it was all she knew. The forest, with its winding paths and jagged cliffs, had always been a part of her life. It was where she had learned to survive, and it would be where she would make her stand. As night fell, the temperature dropped dramatically. Clara wrapped Isaac tightly in his cloak and pulled him close, trying to shield him from the biting wind. The snow was beginning to fall in soft flurries, and Clara knew the wilderness would become even more dangerous in the coming days. They had to keep moving, to keep running, until they reached the distant mountains where they could find shelter. Clara had no illusions about how difficult their journey would be. They would face hunger, freezing nights, and worse, if Joshua found them, he would not hesitate to do anything to get Isaac back. Isaac's little voice broke through her thoughts. "Mama, I'm scared." Clara stopped in her tracks and crouched down in front of him. She took his face in her hands, looking into his wide eyes. Her heart clenched. "I know, baby, but we're going to be okay. I promise you, we'll make it through this." Isaac nodded, his tiny hand clutching hers tightly. Clara stood up, her legs aching from the long hours of walking, but she didn't allow herself a moment of weakness, not now. They continued onward, moving through the cold, dark night, with only the sound of the wind and the soft crunch of snow beneath their boots to accompany them. Meanwhile, Joshua Carrington was just getting started. He had been riding for days, determined to find Clara and take back what he believed was his by right. The hatred that burned in his chest for her had not dimmed during his years in prison. If anything, it had grown fiercer, more intense. He had always been a man of violence, a man who took what he wanted by force. And now, after all these years, Clara had something he wanted, his son. The land was his hunting ground now, and he knew the terrain well. He had spent years as a rancher, tracking cattle, but this time he wasn't hunting for livestock. His prey was far more precious and far more vulnerable. Joshua's horse thudded against the frozen earth as he rode through the growing darkness. His mind was sharp, calculating. He knew Clara had nowhere to go. There were only a handful of places where she could hide. He would find her. He always found his prey. But as he rode deeper into the wilderness, something nagged at him. There was something about this chase that felt different. His anger, his need for revenge, he could taste it in the air. It was intoxicating. And then the silence broke. A cry echoed through the mountains. Not the cry of a man, but the cry of a child. The night grew darker, the moon barely a silver sliver in the sky. The mountains ahead loomed like silent giants, their peaks veiled in clouds. And Clara knew they were fast approaching a dangerous part of the wilderness, a place known to few, feared by many. The Ashwood Cliffs, an isolated ridge where few ever returned from, was her only hope of escaping Joshua's wrath. Clara's breath was shallow as she glanced at Isaac, whose face had become pale from the biting cold. His small hand shook from the chill, and his feet were sore from walking for hours. Yet he never complained. Isaac's determination mirrored her own, an unspoken bond between mother and child that neither time nor circumstance could break. "Mama, where are we going?" Isaac's voice trembled, the weight of the unknown pressing heavily on his innocent shoulders. Clara paused, her mind racing. They could not stop now. The night was their only ally, and if they slowed down, Joshua would catch up. "We're going somewhere safe, baby," she said, trying to sound confident, though her heart was heavy. She couldn't bear the thought of anything happening to Isaac. They kept moving, the forest becoming denser, the trees more twisted, as if the wilderness itself was trying to block their path. The world around them was silent, save for the occasional howl of a distant wolf or the creak of the trees. But Clara knew the quiet was deceptive. Danger lurked in every shadow. Meanwhile, Joshua Carrington rode through the night with a single purpose in mind: revenge. His anger had grown with every mile he traveled. His mind was consumed by the images of Clara's betrayal, the years she had taken Isaac from him, and the pain he had suffered in prison. He had never been a patient man, and now, with his freedom regained, he was a man on a mission. The cold wind bit at his face, but it only fueled the fire within him. Every time he thought about Clara's defiance, the way she had abandoned him all those years ago, a surge of rage would course through him. Joshua wasn't just hunting his ex-wife, he was hunting the future he felt had been stolen from him. He needed Isaac. He didn't care what it took. Isaac would be his, and he would make Clara pay for what she had done. His horse's hooves pounded the frozen earth as he rode through the snow-covered terrain. The wind stung his eyes, but his gaze remained fixed on the distance, on the cold horizon. He knew she was close. Clara wouldn't dare go far, not with the boy. Joshua's breath came in ragged gasps as he pushed forward, the landscape a blur around him. His mind had already started to form his plan. Once he had Isaac, he would return to Silver Creek, claim his rights, and make sure Clara never saw her son again. The idea of Isaac growing up without his mother was the only solace Joshua found in the torment he planned to inflict on her. Suddenly, the sound of a distant cry, soft but unmistakable, pierced the air. It wasn't the howl of a wolf. It was the cry of a child. The next morning, Clara awoke to find the landscape transformed. A heavy snow had fallen during the night, blanketing the earth in a pristine sheet of white. The air was sharp, biting at her skin, and the cold seeped deep into her bones. But it wasn't the cold she feared. It was the man who was closing in on them. She glanced down at Isaac, who was still asleep, his face flushed from the cold but peaceful in his slumber. Clara ran her fingers gently through his hair, her heart swelling with love and a deep sense of protection. In that moment, she promised herself that no matter the cost, she would never let him go back to Joshua. She knew the storm was coming. The worst part of their journey was just beginning. And as much as she wanted to shield Isaac from the harsh realities of the world, Clara understood that the world was a ruthless place. The wilderness didn't care about their struggle, and neither did Joshua. Isaac stirred, his small hand reaching for hers. "Mama, I'm hungry," he mumbled, his voice laced with exhaustion. Clara gave him a weak smile, pulling him close for warmth. I know, baby. I'll find us something to eat soon, I promise." But even as she spoke, a sense of dread loomed over her. The howls of wolves echoed in the distance, but there was something else, something darker, approaching. The familiar sound of hooves in the snow reached her ears, and her heart skipped a beat. Clara's eyes narrowed as she scanned the horizon. There, on the edge of the clearing, silhouetted against the pale light of dawn, was a rider, a lone rider. Her breath caught in her throat. It was Joshua. Clara wasted no time. She grabbed Isaac by the hand and yanked him to his feet. "We have to move now," she whispered fiercely, her voice sharp with urgency. Isaac's wide eyes met hers, filled with confusion and fear. "What's wrong, Mama?" "Stay close," Clara ordered, her voice trembling slightly, despite her best efforts to remain strong. She didn't have time to explain. She couldn't. If they stayed any longer, Joshua would catch them, and once that happened, it would all be over. They bolted through the snow, the weight of fear propelling them forward. The forest seemed to stretch out forever, an endless maze of white and gray, the shadows of the trees looming over them like dark sentinels. The air was thin, sharp against their lungs, but Clara kept moving, each step driven by the fear of what might happen if she stopped. Behind them, Joshua rode faster now, the pounding hooves growing louder, closer. Clara could hear his voice carried by the wind, low and threatening, calling out for her. "Clara, come back, damn it! I'll make this easy for you. Don't make me chase you," he yelled. But Clara refused to listen. Every word he spoke fueled her desperation. He wanted to take Isaac, but Clara would die before she let that happen. The chase was on, and with each passing minute, the stakes grew higher. The forest grew denser as Clara and Isaac pressed on, the snow falling harder now, blanketing their path. Her legs burned from exhaustion, and Isaac was slowing down, his little legs struggling to keep pace with hers. "Mama, I can't go anymore." Isaac's voice trembled as he stumbled, his body betraying him. Clara stopped, her heart pounding. She knelt down, taking Isaac's face in her hands. "We have to keep going, Isaac. We can rest soon, I promise." But the doubt crept in. How much longer could they go? How much longer could Clara keep this up before she collapsed under the weight of her fear, her exhaustion, and her love for Isaac? Before she could respond, the sound of hooves grew closer. Joshua was almost there. Clara's heart pounding in her chest, matching the thundering rhythm of the hooves behind him. Her breath came in ragged gasps, but she couldn't stop. Not now, not when Isaac needed her more than ever. The forest was closing in, the trees seeming to stretch toward her like grasping hands. Each step felt heavier than the last, but Clara pushed forward, determined to protect her son at all costs. Isaac was slowing down, his small body trembling from both fear and cold. His face was pale, and his lips quivered as he looked up at her. "Mama, I can't keep going." Clara's heart shattered at the sight. She knelt beside him, cupping his face with her frost-bitten hands, feeling the warmth of his skin against the biting cold air. "I know, baby, I know," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She wanted to tell him they would be okay, but deep down, Clara feared that they might not make it. She gently lifted him into her arms, her body protesting from exhaustion, but her determination fueled her. She could feel Joshua drawing closer, the sound of his horse's hooves vibrating in her bones. Time was running out. "We just have to keep going a little longer, Isaac. Just a little longer, and we'll be safe," Clara promised, though the uncertainty in her heart gnawed at her with every word. Joshua's breath came in harsh bursts, but there was no slowing down now. The trail was growing colder, but it was clear. Clara and Isaac were close. His instincts, sharpened by years of survival, told him that the boy was just beyond reach. Joshua's mind was consumed by fury. Clara had broken his heart once before, and now, with every moment that passed, she was breaking his spirit. He was no longer the man she had once known. He was a man driven by rage, and he would not be denied. His horse galloped over the snow, the creature's hooves sinking deeply into the powdery ground. The cold, sharp air bit at his face, but Joshua barely noticed. He was focused, eyes scanning the landscape for any sign of movement. And then it happened. A flash of movement in the distance. Clara. He saw her then, just ahead, clutching Isaac close to her chest. His lips curled into a dark smile. He was close enough now. Just a few more minutes, and he would have 'em both. He could hear their ragged breaths, the sound of panic growing in the air. But Clara wasn't about to give up. She heard the hooves, felt them drawing nearer, and with a surge of panic, she quickened her pace. The snow was thick, almost like a veil, blurring their vision. Clara stumbled, her boots slipping on the icy ground, but she forced herself to stay upright. Isaac's weight was like a lead anchor around her chest, but she held him close, trying to comfort him despite her own fear. They needed to reach the Ashwood Cliffs. The cliffs were their only hope. The terrain was treacherous, jagged rocks that could easily break a man's leg if he wasn't careful. But Clara knew that if they made it there, the chances of escape would be better. Joshua might not follow them into the cliffs. He wasn't the type to risk his life for a fight. "Mama, I'm scared." Isaac's voice trembled in her arms, his small hands clutching the fabric of her coat. Clara's throat tightened. She had never felt so scared in her life. The weight of everything, the past, the present, and the future, all hung on this moment. She swallowed her fear and pressed on. "I know, sweetie, but we're almost there. You have to be brave for just a little while longer." Isaac nodded, the fire of determination in his young eyes reflecting his mother's strength. They couldn't stop, not now. But as they neared the cliffs, Clara suddenly felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Joshua had closed the distance. The sound of Joshua's horse was deafening now. Clara could hear it coming faster, closer, and the realization hit her like a thunderclap. There was no way they were going to make it to the cliffs in time. Desperation surged through her. She had no choice now but to face Joshua, to confront the man who had caused so much pain in her life. He was not just a figure from her past. He was a living nightmare, and now he was closer than ever. She stopped in her tracks, holding Isaac tighter to her chest, turning to face the dark silhouette of Joshua against the snow. "Clara!" Joshua shouted, his voice low and dangerous, reverberating through the cold. "You can't keep running forever. You know that, don't you?" Clara's heart pounded, but she stood tall, her back straight, the wind whipping around her. Her eyes met Joshua's, and for the first time in years, there was no fear in them, only the cold determination of a mother protecting her child. "I will never give up on him," she said, her voice fierce. Joshua's face twisted with frustration, his hand tightening around the reins. "You think you can keep him from me? You think you can hide from your past forever?" His words cut through the air like a blade. "He's my son, Clara, and I'm taking him back." Clara's pulse quickened, but she shook her head. "No, Joshua, not any more." Without warning, she turned and ran, making a dash toward the cliffs. The rocks ahead seemed like the only thing between them and Joshua. Isaac's small voice cried out, but Clara didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Clara made it to the base of the cliffs, her body shaken from the cold, exhaustion, and adrenaline. She couldn't run anymore, but she could stand her ground. Joshua rode toward her, his horse's hooves thundering against the snow. He was mere feet away when Clara's hand shot out to grab a jagged stone from the ground. Her grip tightened, and for a moment she felt the raw power of survival coursing through her veins. Clara didn't look at Joshua. She didn't need to. All she saw was Isaac, safe, hidden behind a rocky outcrop, his little face wide with terror. "Clara, don't make me do this," Joshua shouted. "We can make this right. Just give me Isaac." But Clara wasn't going to listen anymore. Her only focus was keeping Isaac safe. With one final breath, Clara lunged at him, hurling the stone toward his horse's flank. The horse screamed in pain, rear and back, throwing Joshua off balance. Clara's heart stopped for a moment, but she held firm. Joshua was down, but for how long? Before she could react, Joshua was up again, his gun drawn, aiming straight at her. The wind howled fiercely through the mountain pass, biting and cold, swirling the freshly fallen snow in every direction. Clara crouched behind a tall rock formation, her body tense with anticipation. The rugged landscape before her, once familiar, now felt like a prison, a vast expanse of cold, dark wilderness that stretched endlessly. With Isaac by her side, she felt her strength slipping, but her love for him kept her grounded. There was no turning back now. She couldn't shake the feeling that danger was closing in. Every rustling sound in the trees, every snap of a twig beneath a hidden footstep sent her heart racing. She glanced over at Isaac, who was doing his best to remain quiet, his wide eyes scanning the horizon. Clara placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Stay close, Isaac. We'll be all right," she whispered, though she could feel the cold sweat running down her spine. Her voice, though soft, carried the weight of determination. She had been on the run for days, driven by one singular purpose: to protect Isaac from the past that had once been her life, but now threatened to tear them apart again. George Henderson, her estranged husband, was no ordinary man. He had been violent and cruel, and now, after years of imprisonment, he's out. And he would stop at nothing to reclaim his son, even if it meant putting them both in grave danger. She had fled with Isaac into the mountains, hoping the harsh wilderness would slow George down. But as the days passed, her hope was dwindling. The cold was relentless, food and water were scarce, and most painfully, the fear of being hunted down was never far behind. The echo of footsteps broke her concentration, pulling her back to the present. She tensed. There, at the edge of the forest, a figure emerged through the snowstorm, moving with a steady, confident stride. Clara's heart skipped a beat. Was it him? Was George finally here? But as the figure drew closer, Clara's breath caught in her throat. This was not George. The man who approached them had an air of calm determination about him, his features weathered and hardened by years in the wild. His eyes, though, held something different, a glimmer of understanding, and perhaps a glimmer of hope. The man stopped just a few feet away, his eyes scanning the terrain quickly before resting on Clara and Isaac. For a moment, Clara felt herself stiffen, unsure of whether this stranger was a threat or someone who might offer a chance at survival. But the man raised a hand in a gesture of peace, a small, reassuring nod. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, his voice steady and low. "I know you're running from someone. The name's Thomas Granger. I've been tracking George Henderson for days now. He won't stop looking for you, but you don't have to face this alone." Clara, still wary but too exhausted to question his words, glanced at Isaac, who was clinging to her side. The boy's eyes were wide with fear, and Clara's heart ached to see him so scared. She could feel the weight of the situation, an unfamiliar man, a father who wouldn't stop hunting her, and a dangerous wilderness all closing in. But in that moment, something inside her clicked. This man, this stranger, was offering something she hadn't had in a long time, a chance at safety. "We're not safe here," Clara said, her voice trembling slightly. "George is close. He'll find us. He's relentless." Thomas nodded solemnly, his face hardening as if hardening painful memories. "He's dangerous, I know, but I've seen him make mistakes before. He's not as clever as he thinks. I can get you out of this." Clara took a deep breath, weighing her options. She had no choice but to trust him. "You'll help us?" she asked, her voice small but full of desperation. "I will," Thomas said without hesitation, "but we need to move quickly. I know the trails through these mountains. If we leave now, I can lead you to safety before the storm gets worse, and before Henderson can catch up." Clara didn't hesitate any longer. With a steadying breath, she took Isaac's hand. "All right, lead the way." The hours that followed felt like days. As they moved through the snow-covered forest, Clara felt the exhaustion weigh heavily on her body, but the thought of Isaac's safety pushed her forward. Thomas led them with quiet efficiency, navigating the treacherous terrain as though he had spent a lifetime in these mountains. He was calm, always looking ahead, his sharp eyes scanning their surroundings with every step. Clara couldn't help but admire his composure, even as her own thoughts were consumed by worry. Isaac, though tired, managed to keep up, his small hand gripping hers tightly. Every now and then, he would glance up at Thomas with a mix of awe and curiosity. The stranger seemed so at ease in this harsh environment, moving through it like it was second nature. Clara didn't dare ask too many questions, but she couldn't help wondering who Thomas really was and what had brought him here. The journey was perilous. The wind picked up, howling like a beast, and the snow turned into a near blizzard as they trudged through knee-deep drifts. Yet Thomas never faltered. His calm presence was like a beacon in the storm, and Clara found herself drawing strength from it. They stopped only when they reached a small clearing, sheltered from the worst of the storm by a cluster of tall pine trees. Clara's legs were stiff, her body aching, but she didn't dare stop long. They couldn't afford to be out in the open for too long. As they settled down for a brief rest, Clara took the opportunity to talk to Thomas, her voice quiet against the roar of the wind. "How do you know George?" she asked, trying to piece together the mystery of this man who had come to their aid. Thomas paused for a moment, his expression hardening slightly. "We have a history," he said simply, before turning his attention back to the surroundings. "But that's not important now. What matters is getting you and Isaac to safety." Clara nodded, understanding the need to focus. But something about Thomas's guarded tone told her there was more to the story. She didn't press him further. In this moment, all that mattered was survival. As the hours passed, the storm outside intensified, but inside the makeshift shelter, Clara, Isaac, and Thomas shared a quiet moment apiece. Clara's mind kept wandering back to the time she had spent running from George, to the fears she had carried with her for so long. But now, with Thomas's quiet strength and his unwavering resolve, she felt a glimmer of hope. Isaac had fallen asleep in her lap, his breath slow and steady. Clara ran her fingers through his hair, her heart aching with love for him. The life she had tried to create for him, one free from the shadow of George, had been shattered. But now there was a chance, a slim one, but a chance nonetheless, that they could start anew. She glanced at Thomas, who was sitting with his back to the wall, his rifle at his side. His eyes were focused, but there was a weariness in them that matched her own. Despite the silence between them, she felt a quiet bond growing between them, a shared understanding born from the harsh reality of the wilderness. The storm outside raged on through the night, the howling wind carrying with it the weight of impending danger. Inside the shelter, Clara could hear Isaac's soft, steady breathing, a gentle reminder of what she was fighting for. The flickering light of the fire cast long shadows on the walls of their temporary refuge, and Clara found herself staring into the flames, her thoughts swirling like the snow outside. Thomas sat across from her, sharpening his knife with quiet precision. Every motion was deliberate, and his silence seemed to fill the room, heavy and tangible. Clara could sense that he too was on edge, that the calm demeanor he displayed was the result of years spent surviving in the wild. But beneath that exterior, she knew he was fighting his own battles, just as she was. For the first time in days, Clara allowed herself to close her eyes for a moment. She thought of the past, the days when she had been happy, when she had believed she could build a life with George. The man she had once loved now seemed like a distant memory, replaced by the nightmare of his violence. That man had stolen her future, and for years she had been running from him, from the choices she had made. But in that moment, as she sat beside Thomas with Isaac in her lap, Clara realized something profound. She was no longer running. She was fighting. Thomas's voice broke through her thoughts. "We'll need to move at first light," he said, his tone quiet but firm. "The storm's not going to last much longer. If we're going to get ahead of Henderson, we need to use the cover of the snowstorm to our advantage." Clara nodded, trying to steady the storm of emotion swirling within her. "And if we can't outrun him?" "We'll face him," Thomas replied, his eyes meeting hers with a look of unspoken understanding. "Together." Morning arrived with an eerie calm, the storm having passed overnight, leaving a crisp silence that felt almost unnatural. The snow-covered landscape stretched out before them, a vast expanse of white, as though the earth itself had been wiped clean of all past transgressions. Clara stood, brushing the frost from her clothes, her breath visible in the cold morning air. Isaac, still tired but determined, stood beside her, his small hand clutching hers. He looked up at her with trust in his eyes, and for a moment Clara saw nothing but innocence in his gaze. He had never known a world without fear, without the looming threat of George. But today she would change that. Today they would find safety. Thomas moved ahead, leading the way down the narrow trail that wound through the mountains. Clara and Isaac followed closely, keeping a steady pace. The quiet was deafening, the only sounds the crunch of snow beneath their feet and the occasional rustling of a bird in the trees. Despite the peaceful appearance of the morning, Clara felt the weight of the situation. George Henderson was still out there, somewhere. He was relentless. But for the first time, Clara felt something inside her stir, a spark of hope that perhaps they could outrun their past, that perhaps there was a future waiting for them beyond this wilderness. By midday, they had traveled far, moving deeper into the forest, away from the known paths. The air was thin, and the terrain grew more treacherous with each step. Clara could feel the tension building, as though the very earth beneath her feet was bracing for the inevitable. And then the unmistakable sound of boots crunching through snow broke the silence. Thomas stopped dead in his tracks, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle slung across his back. Clara froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Isaac looked up at her, his face pale with fear. She didn't have to say anything. He knew what was coming. George Henderson appeared through the trees, his face twisted with anger and desperation. The years in prison had done nothing to diminish the cruelty in his eyes. His gaze locked onto Clara, and for a moment she saw the same man she had once loved. But now he was nothing more than a shadow of that past. "Clara?" George's voice was hoarse, but there was no mistaking the venom in it. "You can't run forever. Isaac is mine. He's my son, and I'm taking him back." Clara stood tall, though her insides were churning. She held Isaac's hand tighter, her heart racing. Thomas stepped in front of her, his presence calm but unwavering. "You won't take him," he said simply, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. George sneered, his hand twitching near his belt. Clara could see the anger in his eyes, the desperation of a man who had lost everything and was determined to reclaim it at any cost. "Stay back," Thomas warned, his voice low and steady. "I won't let you harm them." For a long moment there was silence. The world seemed to hold its breath, as if nature itself was waiting to see what would happen next. Then, in one swift motion, George lunged forward, his hands reaching for Isaac. Thomas reacted instantly, his movements fast and precise. He raised his rifle, the shot ringing out in the still air. It wasn't meant to kill, but to disarm. George staggered back, a look of shock crossing his face as he clutched his shoulder. Clara gasped, stepping back instinctively, pulling Isaac with her. "Thomas, is he—" "He'll live," Thomas replied, his voice calm but firm. "But he won't be chasing anyone any time soon." George fell to his knees, cursing under his breath. "This isn't over, Clara. I'll come for him. I'll come for both of you." Clara's heart hammered in her chest as she watched him, but she knew deep down that this was the end. George might have been relentless, but he was no longer a threat to them. The days that followed were quiet, but Clara could feel the weight of what they had just survived. The road ahead would not be easy. They still had to cross the mountains, find a place to call home, and rebuild everything they had lost. But for the first time, Clara allowed herself to believe in a future. Thomas led them to a small cabin nestled in a secluded valley. It wasn't much, but it was safe. It was a place to start over. As Clara and Isaac stepped inside, the warmth of the fire, the comfort of a roof over their heads, and the sound of nature outside filled her with a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. "Thank you," Clara said quietly, her voice filled with gratitude. She looked at Thomas, who was already gathering firewood, his face unreadable. "I didn't do it for thanks," Thomas replied. "I did it because it's the right thing to do." Clara nodded, feeling a sense of respect for the man who had saved them. She could see that beneath his stoic exterior, Thomas carried his own burdens. But in this moment, he was their protector, their guide, and, in a way, their savior. As the fire crackled in the hearth and the wind whispered outside, Clara wrapped Isaac in a blanket, her arms around him, holding him close. This, she thought, was the beginning of a new life. And though the road ahead would be long and uncertain, for the first time in years she wasn't afraid. Together, they would face whatever came next. Clara had spent years convincing herself that the past was behind her, that the shadows of her former life, of George, could never catch up. She believed that by running, by hiding, she could erase the memories of violence and fear that haunted her every step. But now, in the vast emptiness of the Appalachian Mountains, with the cold, unforgiving winds whistling through the past was never behind. It had been over a week since they had fled the small cabin near the valley, each day blending into the next in a blur of exhaustion, fear, and survival. The wilderness, dense and intimidating, was both a refuge and a prison. The towering trees, the steep cliffs, the ever-present hum of nature. It was all a reminder that there was nowhere left to run. George would find them. He always did. And yet, amidst the dread that gripped her chest, there was a flicker of something more, something Clara hadn't felt in a long time. It was fragile, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Hope. Isaac, her son. The days they had spent traveling had brought them closer, knitting them together in ways that words could not express. Isaac, once a scared boy hiding behind her skirts, was now something more. A young man, strong in his resolve, capable in his own right. With every passing moment, he grew more confident, more protective. Clara realized that while she had fought so hard to protect him, he was also beginning to protect her. In his eyes, she saw the same determination she had once seen in herself, the same courage that had pushed her to escape her old life. Sitting by the fire, the orange glow flickering over their faces, Clara looked at Isaac. His youthful face was still marked by a trace of fear, but it was a different kind of fear now. It wasn't the terror of the unknown, but the quiet acceptance of the truth. They were on their own, and the danger wasn't over. "Mom," Isaac's voice broke through her thoughts, soft yet steady. "Are we going to be okay?" Clara's heart twisted at the simple question. How could she answer him? How could she promise him safety when she didn't even know if they would make it through the night? But she had to say something. She had to give him the strength to keep moving forward, even if she didn't have the answers herself. "I don't know, Isaac," she replied, her voice low, tinged with a sadness she couldn't hide. "But I do know this. We've made it this far, and we'll keep going, No matter what. Isaac nodded, the flickering firelight catching in his eyes. His grip on her hand tightened, and in that moment, Clara knew that they were no longer just surviving together. They were fighting for each other. They were a team. The nights grew colder as the days passed, and Clara's fears seemed to sharpen, becoming more visceral with every silent hour that stretched on. They hadn't seen any sign of George for days, but Clara's instincts told her that his pursuit was relentless. No matter how deep they went into the mountains, no matter how carefully they hid, the past would always catch up. On the fifth night, the air was crisp, the stars barely visible through the heavy canopy of trees above. The fire crackled in front of them, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Isaac sat beside her, his face a mixture of exhaustion and unease. His eyes darting to the trees every so often, as if expecting someone or something to emerge from the shadows. Then Clara heard it. The faint, rhythmic sound of hooves, growing louder, nearer. Her breath hitched in her chest. George. He had found them. "Thomas," Clara whispered urgently, her voice trembling despite herself. "Do you hear that?" Thomas, ever watchful, immediately stood and signaled for silence. His eyes scanned the trees, his senses sharpened by years of experience. The sound of hooves grew louder still. "They're coming," Thomas said, in a low, steady voice, his face grim. "We need to move, now." Clara's stomach dropped. The moment she had been dreading had arrived. There was no more running. She turned to Isaac, her heart hammering in her chest. "Isaac, stay close. No matter what happens, stay with me." Isaac didn't say anything, but the way his hand clasped hers tightly told her everything she needed to know. He was ready to face whatever came next, just as she was. They moved swiftly through the underbrush, the shadows of the forest swallowing them whole as they sought refuge in a narrow ravine. The dense trees and thick undergrowth hid them from view, but Clara knew it wouldn't be long before George and his men found them. Her mind raced. What were they going to do? How could they possibly fight back against a man like George, with all his rage and power? Thomas moved ahead, his hand resting on his revolver, scanning the surroundings. He was calculating, always thinking 3 steps ahead. Clara admired him for that, but even his sharp instincts couldn't keep them safe forever. The silence was deafening, broken only by the wind rustling through the leaves. Clara's heart pounded in her chest, the cold seeping deeper into her bones. And then, from the darkness, she heard it. "Clara!" The voice was low, but full of venom. George! He had found them. Her blood ran cold. She held her breath, trying to steady her racing pulse. "Clara!" George repeated, louder this time. "Come out! You can't hide from me forever!" Clara's chest tightened. The dread she had been pushing down for so long surged up once more, threatening to overwhelm her. She could hear the sound of horses moving closer, the crunch of boots on the ground. Thomas stepped forward, his gun drawn. "You'll have to go through me first, George," he said, his voice calm but carrying an edge. "We won't let you take her." For a moment, there was a tense silence. George's shadow loomed just beyond the trees, his presence like a storm on the horizon. "I don't want to fight you, Thomas," George said, his voice dripping with menace. "But you know I will." Clara's heart raced. This was it, the moment she had been preparing for. She had to act, and she had to do it now. But as she glanced at Isaac, something changed. Something clicked inside her. Isaac, once the scared boy she had shielded with every ounce of her strength, now stood tall. His eyes, once wide with fear, were fixed on George and his men with a quiet, resolute determination. Clara opened her mouth to stop him, to tell him to stay back, but Isaac was already moving. He stepped out from behind the rocks, holding a rifle tightly in his hands, his young face set with a newfound confidence. "Mom," he said softly, his voice steady, "I won't let him hurt you." The words struck Clara like a lightning bolt. This wasn't the boy she had known. This was someone else, someone who had been forged in the fires of their shared suffering. He was no longer just following her lead. He was standing alongside her, fighting for what was theirs. The moment Isaac stepped forward, the tension broke. George's voice faltered just for a moment before he regained his composure. "You think you can stop me?" George sneered. Isaac didn't flinch. He aimed the rifle, steady in his hands, and fired. The shot rang out, splitting the night air. The bullet struck the ground near George, forcing him to stumble back, startled. But the message was clear. They were not helpless. Clara watched in awe as Isaac lowered the rifle, his hands shaken only slightly. She had never seen him like this before. She had always protected him, always tried to shield him from the dangers of the world. But now he was the one doing the protecting. George stood still, his anger flaring. But for the first time, doubt entered his eyes. He had always thought of Clara and Isaac as weak, easy prey, but they weren't that anymore. They were survivors, and they would not back down. Clara stepped forward, her voice firm and resolute. "Leave us, George. This ends now." And in that moment, Clara realized the truth. Nothing, not even the darkest shadows of the past, could take away the strength they had found in each other. Nothing could tear them apart. They were no longer running. They were fighting, and they would win. The morning after the confrontation, the forest felt eerily quiet. The trees, once so full of life, now seemed to stand in solemn silence, as if mourning the weight of the choices that had been made. Clara sat on a fallen log, Isaac by her side, both of them exhausted but resolute. The brief standoff with George had been the tipping point, a pivotal moment that had shifted the balance. The danger was far from over, but they had taken the first step toward reclaiming their future. Clara's thoughts were heavy with the uncertainty of the road ahead. She had always been the protector, the one who shielded Isaac from harm. But today she felt a shift. Isaac had stepped forward when she had faltered. He had shown her the kind of courage she had never expected from him. And in that moment, something changed between them. A silent understanding that they were no longer just mother and child. They were partners, equal in their fight for survival. Isaac glanced up at her, his eyes still wary, but filled with a new sense of purpose. "Mom," he said softly, breaking the stillness, "do you think we can make it? Do you think we can really leave this place behind?" Clara turned to him, her heart swelling with pride. Isaac's question wasn't just about their immediate escape. It was about their future, their chance to rebuild everything they had lost. "I don't know, Isaac," she answered, her voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling inside her. "But we're not going to give up. Not now, not ever." Isaac nodded, his jaw set with determination. She could see it now. The boy who had once feared the world was gone, replaced by someone who knew what it meant to fight, to stand up and face what was coming head on. In him, she saw the strength she had always hoped he would find. And then, as if on cue, the sound of hooves broke the silence once more. Clara's heart skipped a beat as the unmistakable sound of approaching riders reached her ears. George hadn't given up, not by a long shot. The chase had gone on for too long, and now it was nearing its end. They had no more time to waste, no more time to hide. Thomas had been scouting ahead for days, but the fact that George was still tracking them meant that he had been tracking them with terrifying precision. Clara's blood ran cold as she realized just how close they were to the final confrontation. "Get ready," Thomas whispered urgently, his face grave. "This is it. They're almost here." Clara looked at Isaac, her hand tightening around his. She could see the fear in his eyes, but there was something else there now, something that mirrored the resolve in her own heart. They had come so far. They couldn't stop now. "Isaac," Clara said, her voice low but steady, "stay close to me. No matter what happens, you stick with me." Isaac nodded, his grip tightening on his rifle. He was ready. He was no longer just her child. He was her partner, her protector. The forest was silent as they made their way through the underbrush, careful to stay hidden. The wind had died down, and for a moment it felt as if the world had paused, holding its breath. Clara's senses were sharp. Every rustle of a leaf, every snap of a twig, amplified in the stillness. She could hear them now, the riders, their hooves growing louder with each passing second. It was time. They reached the clearing just as the riders appeared through the trees, their horses moving swiftly, kicking up dirt as they approached. Clara's heart raced, but she didn't flinch. She wasn't gonna run anymore. George was at the front, his face twisted with a mix of anger and desperation. Behind him were his men, faces grim, but their eyes never straying from Clara and Isaac. "You really think you can outrun me, Clara?" George's voice was harsh, filled with venom. He had always believed she was weak, fragile, but now he was seeing a different side of her. Clara stood her ground, Isaac by her side, his rifle pointed directly at George. Thomas had positioned himself behind them, a silent sentinel. "We're not running anymore, George," Clara said, her voice calm but full of conviction. "This ends here." For a moment, there was nothing but silence, the weight of their words hanging in the air. Then George laughed, a low, mocking sound. "You've got courage, I'll give you that," he sneered, "but it's not enough." Clara's pulse quickened as she realized the true stakes of this moment. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about breaking free, about reclaiming their future. She had to stay strong, for Isaac, for both of them. "Get off your horse," Thomas said suddenly, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife, "or we'll make you." For a moment, it seemed like the world had frozen. The wind was still. The horses stood motionless. Clara's heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing in on her, threatening to suffocate her. But then she saw it. Just for a moment, a flicker of doubt in George's eyes. For the first time, he hesitated. It was that moment of hesitation that shifted everything. Isaac stepped forward, his rifle steady, his expression unwavering. His voice, though soft, carried the same conviction Clara had heard in herself when she first escaped George's grip. "You don't scare us any more, George," Isaac said, his words firm, unwavering. "We're not the same people we were when you left." The words were simple, but they were the turning point. Clara had seen her son grow, had witnessed his transformation from a frightened child into a young man with his own sense of purpose. In that moment, Isaac had become the symbol of everything they had fought for. George's face contorted in fury. His anger flared, and he lunged toward them, drawing his own weapon. But Clara didn't flinch. She didn't hesitate. She knew what she had to do. Before George could make his move, Thomas acted, his hand pulling his revolver from its holster in a single smooth motion. The shot rang out, echoing through the forest like a thunderclap. The world seemed to stop as the sound of the gunshot faded. George crumpled to the ground, his body jerking with the force of the impact. His men, startled and disoriented, hesitated, some of them looking to flee, others to retaliate. But in that moment, Clara felt a strange sense of calm. It was over. Isaac stepped back, his rifle lowering as he looked at Clara, his face pale but resolute. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. Clara walked over to him, her arms embracing him in a tight embrace. Her heart swelled with pride, but there was something else too, something deeper, a sense of finality. They had done it. They had broken free from the chains of the past. As they looked around, the sun began to rise over the mountains, its first light cutting through the trees, casting long shadows that seemed to promise a future of possibilities. The world was wide open now. They were free. The journey had been long and painful, but it had brought them to this moment, this new dawn. And nothing could ever take that away. The days after the final confrontation were filled with the soft sounds of the forest reclaiming its quiet rhythm. The tension that had held the air for so long, thick and suffocating, was now replaced with a gentle calm. Clara and Isaac, alongside Thomas, had moved farther into the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, away from the remnants of their past, away from the darkness that had once threatened to consume them. The land was vast, untamed, and full of life. It was a place of both solitude and freedom, a new chapter waiting to be written. They found shelter in a small, weathered cabin tucked into a quiet valley, nestled between towering trees and the gentle hum of a nearby creek. The roof, though worn, was sturdy, and the walls offered warmth as the seasons slowly began to change. Outside, the first blush of spring had arrived, painting the landscape with delicate wildflowers and fresh green leaves. It felt like the world was breathing again, like nature itself had granted them the space to heal. Clara sat by the window, gazing out at the vibrant horizon, the sun casting a soft golden light over the valley. Isaac was out front, his hands busy with a small patch of garden they had started together, a simple but deeply meaningful project. He had become skilled with the soil, planting seeds and nurturing life in a way that mirrored his own growth. No longer was he the frightened boy who had once cowered at shadows. Now he was a young man, learning how to build, how to grow, how to thrive. Thomas, ever watchful but equally at peace, had taken on the role of protector and guide. But in this new chapter, his presence was less about guarding against danger and more about providing the wisdom that came from years of experience in the wild. He had taught them both how to listen to the rhythms of the land, the subtle signs in the air, the way the wind shifted, and the language of the trees. It was an odd kind of comfort that had woven itself into their lives. But it was Isaac who brought the most joy to Clara now. She watched him kneel by the garden, carefully watering the small sprouts they had planted together. He hummed softly to himself, his voice a quiet lullaby to the forest that surrounded them. There was something so pure about those moments, something that reminded Clara of the kind of peace she had never thought possible. As the days slipped by, Clara found herself reflecting on everything that had brought them to this point. She thought of the cold, lonely nights they had spent in the wilderness, running from the shadows of the past, from the man who had once called himself her husband. She remembered the fear, the uncertainty, and the raw, unrelenting will to survive. But as much as those memories were etched into her mind, so too were the moments of strength, the moments when she had chosen to protect Isaac at all costs, when she had refused to let the darkness swallow them whole. Those moments had shaped her, had made her into the woman she was today, resilient, hopeful, and fiercely protective of the boy she loved more than anything. The bond they had formed, forged in the fire of their struggles, was now unbreakable. There was no longer any need to look over their shoulders, to fear what might come in the night. The past had been laid to rest, buried beneath the weight of their survival, and with it the chains that had bound them to that life. They had made it. They had won their freedom. Clara had often wondered what the future would hold for them after all of this. Could they really build a life here? Could they truly leave behind the fear, the pain, the scars of the past? The answer, she realized, wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about living, about cherishing the quiet moments, the simple joys, and the beauty of the present. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows over the cabin, Clara and Isaac sat together on the porch, wrapped in the warmth of the dying light. Thomas had gone out for a walk, leaving them in their peaceful solitude. "Do you think we'll always be happy like this?" Isaac asked, his voice quiet but filled with hope. Clara turned to him, smiling softly. The years of hardship had aged them both, but they had also shaped them into something stronger, something better. "I think happiness is something we create," she said, her voice steady. "It's not something that just happens, it's something we choose every day." Isaac nodded, looking out at the view in front of him. The valley stretched out below them, a patchwork quilt of lush greens and the occasional flash of wildflowers swaying in the breeze. It was perfect. For the first time in a long time, Clara felt herself at peace, at home. "You know, Mom," Isaac said after a moment of silence, "I think I've found what I want to do now. I want to help people. Help them build a life like this, away from all the noise and fear. Maybe even make a place where others can find peace like we did." Clara's heart swelled with pride as she looked at him. The boy who had once been so lost in fear had now found a purpose, a direction. He was ready to forge his own path. "I think that's a beautiful idea," she said, her voice full of warmth. "And I'll be here, every step of the way." They sat in silence for a while longer, the air cooling as night descended. The stars slowly appeared overhead, their light soft and reassuring. It was the kind of night that made you feel small in the best way possible, a reminder of how vast and beautiful the world could be. The next few months passed in much the same peaceful rhythm. Clara and Isaac continued to cultivate the land, learning more about the ways of the forest, while Thomas shared his knowledge with them both. The cabin, though simple, had become their sanctuary, a place of refuge where the echoes of their past no longer haunted them. The small garden they had started together flourished, a testament to the strength they had cultivated, not just in the soil, but in their hearts. Isaac's dreams of creating a community of his own began to take shape in the quiet moments, as he sketched plans and imagined a life where others could escape the chaos of the world and find peace. And in the evenings, after a long day of work, Clara and Isaac would sit on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the mountains, their hearts content in the knowledge that they were exactly where they needed to be. One day, as Clara walked through the woods, a soft breeze tugging at her hair, she stopped to look at the sprawling view. The mountains stood tall in the distance, their peaks kissed by the last light of the day. And for the first time in a long while, Clara felt the weight of the world lift from her shoulders. The past was behind them. The darkness had been defeated. And in its place, there was light, there was hope, there was a future. She turned to head back toward the cabin, her heart light, her steps steady. Behind her, Isaac worked the land, his dreams already taken root. They were free, and nothing could ever take that away. Subscribe now and help us keep the spirit of love, grit, and the Old West alive. As we close this chapter, we are reminded that every story, no matter how complete it seems, leaves something behind, a question, a hope, a spark for what could come next. Clara and Isaac's journey is a reminder that the end is never truly the end. It is, instead, the beginning of a new chapter, one that will continue to unfold with every decision we make, every dream we dare to pursue. Their story is far from over, and neither is yours. The lessons we've learned from Clara and Isaac are just as relevant to our own lives. Each one of us carries the potential to rise above our challenges, to create a future shaped by the strength of our choices, our love, and our hope. If Clara and Isaac's journey has inspired you, join us by subscribing to our channel. Your support motivates us to continue sharing more stories that empower and uplift. Thank you for being part of this journey. The best is yet to come.